Is het rode licht
Nu
aan?
doet hem een beetje touw, we'll see if I can hear it.
Want dat rode licht aan is, dan neemt het beeld af.
Oh,
Ja, als er nu neemt het al beeld af.
Would you just talk into that microphone there, see whether,
And this microphone here is already operating.
well, take it a little closer, let's see if I can.
A little closer like that.
Right to your face, I just want, mouth, yeah, I just want to test it a little.
Okay, now we're about at this level here. Can you hear it?
That's
No,
not it.
it's not it. No, het schaft nog niet. Schaft nog niet. Ja, we hebben nog een beetje water. Kost nog rust hier. Nee? Het schaft gelijk.
Unless
Maybe your testing equipment isn't working.
that could be.
Ja. Nou, rode licht, dat zegt, nu ruimt het op.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm picking it up from here.
Ja.
There I am, but I'm not picking it up from yours. That's what I'm trying to get. So
How about now?
I may have to use another one here, just a minute. I'll shut that off.
Wel wat afstaan.
Here.
Nu ruimt het wel weer. Hier tekst, nee, dat is wel waar. Yeah. See, ordinarily we could probably do it in larger, het kunnen we plastisch maken. Maar onze grootkinderen die kunnen dat niet verstaan.
no, that's more useful.
Right.
No, exactly. And since you were a teacher teaching in English, it's no problem. No.
He begins to think in English, but not.
Exactly. You, already years ago, you were way ahead of the others in Steinbach.
Strange.
You went to Gretna.
No, just for a summer course.
Oh.
I taught summer courses. So most of them in Altona.
Well,
One
seems
in
strange.
Gretna.
Got your desire, but I don't
Well,
know.
here, that's picking up nicely.
Oh, yeah?
Uh-huh.
I've had trouble
High
once
school.
with this before,
High
but
school.
Uh-huh.
At that time,
Battery.
teachers were required to have only grade 11. But I was wondering
Like at
whether
that,
the time wouldn't come when they
Symposium we
would
had there this
grade
spring at
12,
the
and I
Bible
taught
school.
grade 12 too, so that I
Yeah.
didn't need
Dave
to
Shelbrick
study
had some
later
trouble there
on
too,
when I was
getting that
All
out.
right.
And then, in addition, did you have what you call normal school or
Yeah.
teacher training?
I'll just go close and then I'll pick it up from here.
During a year or just summers?
No, during a year.
Ah, you took a full year.
Yeah, I took a full year.
What year was that?
25, 26.
Ah, okay.
Okay, we will do it, I'm picking it up over here and that's not too bad.
Ah, okay.
So I'll leave it there. I still don't know quite what happened here because
And if it doesn't pick it up here, he's got one right near the light up there. So that's also a microphone.
Since this is a report for the future, I'll some moments have to do a little thinking. before
That's fine. There's no rush.
yeah, just you can get started. Go ahead.
Yeah. And
You may want to introduce it a little bit
yeah.
here. And then we'll
This is Mr. John C Reimer, who has lived in this part of Manitoba all his life. He was born in this part of southeastern Manitoba and was one of the first Mennonite teachers in the community, and especially moving also into English, instruction in English. So he is that generation that bridged that period from the first pioneers to here we are towards the end of the 19th century already, in 1987. The date today is August 8, 1987. And Uncle John, as we know, and as we will talk about it in the next few minutes, we will find out why we call him Uncle John. And he, about a year ago, moved into this Fernwood, is it called? Fernwood apartment complex. His wife, Aunt Marie, died about a year and a half ago, in April of '86, yeah? And then about September, about almost a year ago, Uncle John moved in here, a very nice, comfortable apartment. My brother, Bert, Wilbert Loewen, is behind this new camera, and we would like to just make a little recording with Uncle John and let him reminisce a little bit. And perhaps we could start somewhere in your childhood and maybe talk a little bit about Steinbach, or even go a little farther back on the first families that settled here, because you are also the historian of the community who was instrumental in getting also the Mennonite village founded. I remember years ago when I was a young boy, but already you sensed that I had an interest in history, and you asked whether I would become a member of the Historical Society. And I don't know whether I'm number 79 or 179, but I joined it, as I recall, many years ago. But you were faithful enough to stay in the community and do something about it, and I ran away. So why don't you tell us a little bit, and then we will interrupt, and we will stop, and then we will reflect a little bit, so we have time to make a recording.
I was born in Steinbach, and my parents moved to the farm nearby Steinbach at the age when I was 3.
You were born what year?
In 1894.
Huh.
And since we go back to the 18th century, I could tell one interesting story. The Queen of England, Queen Victoria of England, she celebrated her 60th year of reign in 1897. And Winnipeg celebrated that too at that time. And my parents, who had just moved to the farm on that year, they went to Winnipeg to see the celebration there. And so they went. They went the night before, and they wanted to be there in the morning so that we would see the parade and hear the salute of guns. And I heard the salute of guns for Queen Victoria's celebration for her 60th year of reign.
When you were 3 years old?
Not that I remember it, but I was there. I'm sure I heard it. And my mother and father told me so, that we had been there. I grew up on the farm, and
Where was the farm?
the farm was just half a mile west of Steinbach, Main Street, at the north end.
Ah, where you later lived? Was that the home place?
Yes, that was the home place.
In Donnabush.
Yeah, it's called the Bush Farm now.
Just keep right on going.
And I went to school in Steinbach. I had my schooling in Steinbach. And I had to stay on the farm because I was needed very much on the farm. And and I had to stay on the farm until the year of age. That was at 21 years at that time, and I stayed on the farm until that time. I had learned no trade except the farming, so I started working out whatever I could find. But in my mind, I was looking for a school. In those days, the churches had their own, the Mennonite ethnic group had their own schools yet, and so anyone that had the intelligence could become a teacher. And I was looking for that position, but it took some time. I worked out a little bit before that, and but all at once I had a position to teach in a country school. And then then came the years that the government took over the schooling.
Let me interrupt. What was the first year that you started teaching?
1917. On 1917, after New Year.
When you were 22 years old?
Yes. And I had a school. I learned the trade of the private school teacher. I learned the way they did it and the way they trained their teachers. They had no high school, but they had a certain way of training their teachers. They had meetings twice a year where they gave an examination lesson where all the teachers were present. The surrounding teachers would be present, and in the forenoon they had the class there, and the teacher taught the lessons the way he did it. And then in the afternoon, the children were not there, but the teachers had a meeting. And at that meeting, they had a set of questions that were somehow similar to the training we got at the Teachers College later on. Somehow they had the same principles. The teacher and the private school had to be a man of character. It was very important at that time because they had teachers for a long time. Most of them were men teachers. And then they gave them a set of questions, and they were in particular, they were the manner of the movements of the teacher and the way he taught the lesson and the way he applied to the children. It was a schooling in itself, and I got that, but only for a few years.
Who organized these 1 or 2 day sessions? Wasn't the eldest
Oh,
of the churches? No.
The teachers did that.
The teachers themselves?
Yes,
as
the
an
teachers
association?
did that themselves.
Ah.
They organized those meetings. They were not the examinations that they had in spring for the public to come. They were meetings for themselves, the teachers only, and that was their training. So any person that wanted to be a teacher, he would go there and he would learn quite a bit there. So they were not altogether uneducated when they began to teach, and they learned more and more as they taught each year. So when the private schools closed, I worked at something else, but the official trustee of the department, he came to me and wanted me to teach in the public school for the government.
You had been teaching in a private school?
I had been teaching a couple of years in the private school, and he knew that I had been teaching, and he asked me time and again, and circumstances were such that At first, I didn't want to because I thought I had a good position where I worked and in a store at that time. But finally, I switched over and took high school.
This first teaching that you did in the private school was which school? In Steinbach? In which school?
It was in Steinbach and in a country school too. First in a country school and then for 1 year in Steinbach.
Which country school? How far away?
Oh, Blumenhof.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So that's was to be my career.
Would Uncle John remember any of the beginning students? Would any of my mother's younger sisters have been in the private school? Let's say Pauline Friesen or Marie Friesen, Mrs. P.D. Reimer, because they talked about having to go private school and also public school. You wouldn't have had any of them in your school at that
No,
time?
no, that was later. Mine
No.
was later than
Okay,
that.
okay. Wonder whether,
And then you took high school so that you could go and teach in a public school.
Yes, the government gave us a permit to teach for 1 year if it would continue our high school improvement. And I took all my high school and summer courses. I think it was about 10 summer courses that I took until I had grade 12.
Uh-huh.
And then we had to go to Teachers College, the normal school in Winnipeg, where we lived for 1 year. And some of my friends, they took normal school at the same time.
What year did you take the 1 year in residence in normal school? What year was that?
I took my normal school training year in 1925 and 1926.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. And then you taught in public school till what year? You taught how many years then till?
Yeah, after that, I taught school for 25 years in the public schools.
Mainly in the Blumenhof, Kleefeld, Steinbach area.
Yeah, mostly in Blumenhof and Blumen North. I was 11 years in Blumen North.
So with 7 or 8 years in private school, plus another 25 years in public school.
No, it was all together. It was 25
Ah,
years.
yes. Uh-huh.
I think, did you not the last years teach in Akron? In Akron, did you not teach?
Yes, I taught in Akron too.
Yeah, because I think we went, I was a little boy, we came to visit you. You lived out there, Tante
Yeah.
Marie and Uncle John.
Yes, yes, that was I taught there too, but only a few years.
Right.
Could we perhaps in our conversation move a little bit to Steinbach, the founding of the town by these 18 families, and then there was the original village that was along Main Street, but the fields were scattered. And then at the turn of the century, was it 1910 about, 1908, in which they decided to go along with the pattern of Western Canada to have these square mile blocks and the farmers scattered and lived on their land. Do you recall that? You were very young at the time.
Yes, I recall that. I recall the village when their houses, the dwellings were only on one side of the street, and a few houses on the other side. But the original farmers lived only on one side of the street. I remember it from that time.
On the southwest side.
Yes. And I remember, well, that goes with it, a pioneer town or village. I remember that we got stock on Main Street with a load of machinery, of implements. We came from Giroux with a load of implements with machinery, and we got stuck on Main Street and the mud holes. I remember that too.
Yeah. The story has it that our Bert's and my grandfather K.I. Friesen, who had horses and a wagon and a sort of dray service from Giroux to here. That was later. Since you mentioned mud holes on Main Street, apparently he was the first to gravel Main Street. He had a wagon and he brought gravel, and apparently there were certain places there were springs, and the gravel would always disappear, and about every other year he had to dump more gravel into those holes.
Yeah. And when I retired from teaching, I had, from my youth, I had an interest in the history of our parents. My parents came to America when they were school children, 5 and 7 years old. And I remember them telling stories from Russia, and I was interested in that. And I listened when they talked. I listened when they talked, and that interest, well, it was just natural for me. When they told anything of that bygone days, I listened intensely what it was. Later on, as we all do when we get older, we are more interested in our past. And I began to be more interested in our village, how it had started, and I kept items. Even somehow I kept my toys that I got as a childhood. I still have some of them. And I somehow, unintentionally, I gathered old things, antiques, as I grew older. I bought antiques where I could find them. I had worked in my uncle's store. My uncle took the store over from his father, my grandfather, and I had worked in that store for some years in between. And when after I retired, I all at once found that old store building that had been moved out of town, had gone to the southern part of the village. It had been a barn, it had been a garage, it had been a granary and whatnot. But I saw that store. It had come back to Steinbach. And I purchased the store and restored it as far as possible, just in the condition as I had seen it in childhood and later when I worked in the store. And I restored the building and put it up on Main Street at the north end of the village and put my gathered antiques in there. And I locked it up, and it was not open all the time. I had it locked. I lived nearby on a farm, and when people asked for it, I would open it for them. The teacher's tour of Manitoba, they came one time and asked for it, if I would show them the building with the antiques in there, and I did so. I still have pictures of that. And I had that building on Main Street there for 13 years. Then the museum that we have now started to be.
About what year was it founded, this museum as we now know it? What year did it start?
We built the building there on 65, and in spring of 66 we opened the door. We had very few items to put in the new building. but we opened the door in the spring of '66. There was an official opening on '67, which was the centennial year of Manitoba. Then we had the official opening of the museum. And I was the first curator of the museum for the first 8 years. It's a long, long story that how that started, the beginning of it. We can hardly go into detail of that, but that was the beginning of the building there is now. And after the Mennonite Village Museum had started, I donated my store and all my collection. I donated to the museum, and it is there yet. It stands there as it was, with a collection of items in there that I had gathered through the years.
And what was the store name? I think the sign is on the store. What was the store called?
My grandfather started the store as a pioneer would.
And his name was?
Klaus Reimer.
So it was known as the Klaus Reimer store?
Yes. Yes, that was Klaus Reimer's store. That was the first store on this side of Winnipeg.
And where did it stand on Main Street? Did it stand on Main Street in Steinbach?
Yes.
Where?
When he...
When he ran it, when you were there as a young man, as a clerk?
The store stood where Steinbach Place is now, and where the credit union is now.
Oh, yeah.
That was the grandfather's yard, the homestead of the village lot. So that's where the store started.
Can we get to the C.B. Loewen family a little bit more?
Yeah.
Like in Tante Marie and our fathers.
In a roundabout way, you became our uncle, or more correctly, we became your nephews. Tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, your wife, and then go backwards and tell us about our grandfather, C.B. Loewen.
Yeah, I married into the family. It was a stepdaughter, but I married into the family. That's why I got into the family. But somehow I got into the family before that. My grandmother, Mrs. Jacob Barkman, married your great-grandfather, Mr. Cornelius W. Loewen.
Ah.
So that was my grandfather in a way. If my grandfather married Mr. Loewen, that was my step-grandfather at that time.
So that was his second wife.
Yes.
Mrs. Barkman was his second wife.
Yes. Mrs. Barkman was the wife of Jacob Barkman, Reverend Jacob Barkman, who bought the Steinbach group of immigrants from Russia to Canada. And
Tleniamencha leader. He was a Tleniamencha leader in the Ukraine, in the Molochna.
yes. And her husband, Mr. Barkman, died the first spring that the Mennonites were here. He drowned in the Red River, the first spring.
Spring of 75.
Of 75. Then in 1977, my grandmother, Mrs. Barkman, married my step-grandfather, Cornelius W. Loewen.
Aha!
2 years later, 1877.
Yes.
He said 1977.
No,
He meant 18.
yeah.
Mrs. Barkman had been a Mrs. Barkentine before she married Mr. Barkman. And Mr. Barkman, Jacob Barkman, he had been married before too. So Mrs. Barkman, my grandmother, had 2 children from her first marriage. And Mr. Barkman had 4 children from his first marriage. So when they married, they had 2 sets of children there, the Barkentine children and the Barkman children. And then they had 3 children of their own, so that there are 3 sets of children at the dining table at home.
Yes.
Then she married Mr. Loewen,
Yeah.
and he brought along 2 boys, 14 and 12 years of age. So they had 4 sets of children in their family when they started. I guess they were not all home at the same time. Some of them, some of the older ones had married already. Mr.
Okay, and then, did they then, this C.W. Loewen and then this Mrs. Barkman, who became Mrs. Loewen, they also had children? Or no?
No, they had no children.
That was past bearing age?
Yeah, they
Okay.
were out of age.
Okay, but the two sons that Mr. Loewen had were C.B. and Isaac B.
Yes. Yes.
There were those 2 boys, 14 and 12,
Yes, 14 and 12
who
years.
later became our grandfather C.B., and Isaac B. is the one who moved to Alberta.
Yes. And Mr. Loewen, when he married, he lived in Cleefhout, and he moved to Steinbach with Mrs. Barkman. And they lived together for 12 years. Mrs. Barkman, or Mrs. Loewen later on, she died in 1889, and Mr. Loewen died in 1893. So he lived
4 more years.
4 more years after she passed away.
Uh-huh.
My mother was the only child left at home when her mother died. And she often talked about the Loewen's father. She often talked about him. And nothing bad, I don't know anything. He was a poor man, that you know. And if it's interesting, later, Mr. Loewen, you know, the inheritance had been given to the Barkmans. So Mrs. Loewen, or Mrs. Loewen, could not leave any part behind, because it was all donated to the previous children. And Mr. Loewen bought a farm which is 1 mile west, 1 mile east of the water tower in Steinbach, and across the Highway 52 from the inn on Highway 52 outside of Steinbach. And my mother moved with Father Loewen, but she worked out. She was of age already, and she worked out, and she stayed on the farm there only 1 day or 2. And then she took her things under the arm and went back to town. She was working out, and she couldn't own that small farm there on the highway. She couldn't get any work there from the people. There was no telephone in those days. So Mr. Loewen likely stayed on that place there. Mother up and spoke of that farm there. They called it the Reimer-Fehr. Reimer is a German name. Some of the Clear Spring settlers that came in 1872 had married some German people, and they, the Mennonite delegates from Russia, and they went to look over the country, see the countryside. They stopped at the Langs, and they talked to Mrs. Lang, who was an Oswald, and they could talk German with her.
How about that?
And this farm that Mr. Loewen bought belonged to Reimer. Reimer was a brother to Mrs. James Steele. The James Steele sisters, the children, they have often said that their mother was a German. So that farm was really owned by a German before that. So that's the history for those days.
Okay, that's C.W. Loewen, and you were related to him through the Barkman clan, the Reimer,
Yes.
because there was a Reimer who had died, and then married a Barkman, and then Mrs. Barkman married C.W. Loewen.
Yes.
All right, then how did you get through your wife's side? Through your wife, you also became related to C.B. Loewen.
Did she come back?
Your wife, when you married your wife, you also married into the Loewens.
Yes, yes, I married because she, how she got into the Loewen family.
Yes, yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, Mrs. C.B. Loewen passed away in 1902, and the next year he married a widow from Blumenort, and Mrs. John Reimer he married, and she had only one daughter. The family had only one child, and my wife was the only child. That's how my wife got into the Loewen family, with mother bringing that stepchild along.
Ah, Reimer, not Dick.
No, she was a Reimer. Her father was a Reimer, and her mother was a Dick. So
Now let's clear that a little bit. Why were then all of their children, did they use the initial D? Henry D, Ben D, was it not for Dick?
yes,
Now where did the Dick come in? You said it was Reimer.
the mother was a Dick.
Her maiden name was Dick,
Yes.
not her first married name.
No, her first married name was Reimer.
Ah, but her as a native, what was her first name?
Mary?
Mary Dick,
Yes,
who married a Reimer.
yes,
And from that marriage, there was your wife, Maria.
yes.
Aha. What initial did your wife then use? She used Reimer. She never used an initial.
No, she never
She
used
was just
that.
Marie.
She was Loewen's Mary. That's what
Loewen's
she
Mary.
married.
Okay.
That was her name in the crowd, and she stayed that
Yeah.
until she married.
Do you remember our grandfather, C.B. Loewen? You remember him?
Oh yes, very
Yeah.
well.
Now, C.W., his father was very poor, and he lived here by the Hunaveri.
Yeah.
But C.B. Loewen, did he grow up there? Where did he grow up, and where did he settle down?
Oh, they were married by that time. The boys were married by that time when Mrs. Loewen died. So they married in 1877, and then she died in 1889.
Yes,
She were together 12 years.
yes.
And in that time they were all married, the
Yeah,
children, except my mother.
Aha, So Isaac, of that original Loewens, there was only Isaac and Knaus.
Yeah.
And there were no girls.
No,
Just those
he
two
just
boys?
brought in the two boys.
Okay. And then where did our immediate grandfather, C.B. Loewen, he became a farmer around Steinbach?
Yes, I must tell something else about C.W. Loewen.
Uh-huh.
He wrote a diary. C.W. Loewen wrote a diary. He started in Russia. There is some Russian in the diary, yet only a few words. But he wrote the diary about the trip, and that is quite complete. That is not in detail, but he wrote that. That's fairly good. I was surprised that he did it so as well as he did. That diary belonged to the Loewen family. And the oldest daughter, Mrs. Gerhard Giesbrecht, she had hung on to that diary for quite a while. And then when she passed away years later, one of Gerhard Giesbrecht's children came and asked me what should we do with that diary. Well, I said, it's yours, it belongs to the Loewen, but she suggested that we should give that to the museum. Then it would be in a safe place where it wouldn't burn, and it could be read there by all the after those were all the family. They could read that later on. So the book is donated there, and that can, once something is donated there, they want to keep that. That's their regulation. But you can go and read it there. And
But there's no library at the museum. Is there a library at the museum? No.
Yes, there is a library, but this book is, I don't know if they have that in the library. I told them to put that in the vault where in the safe where it couldn't burn.
They have a vault where they keep documents?
Yes, they have a big safe. They haven't got the vault, but they have a big safe where they keep all their books.
At the village or in town here?
No,
At the village, at
Yeah,
the museum.
Yeah, at
Okay.
the museum. Yeah, I think the safe is big enough, even if the building burned, it wouldn't be spoiled. And then from Mrs. C.B. Loewen, she had some account books yet from C.B. Loewen's business, and I'm not so sure now, is there something of C.W. Loewen's in there too? I'm not so sure whether he was in business, Mr. C.W. Loewen, but C.B. Loewen was in there, and those books, they belong to you, Loewen family too. They must be placed somewhere. I don't know, there is not much information in there except the prices of some and the people that they dealt with in business, and that's very valuable information when they begin to write history. Then they want prices and they want transactions from the year, and that's because those books I have tied them up separately, and they are yours. You can take them and...
Where are they now?
They are here.
Okay. But would you recommend long range, that they be given to the museum, that they would keep them, or don't they want them?
Yes, they would take them. They would take almost anything, but I wouldn't know. I have sometimes thought, we thought about that too. They belonged to a church. When at that time, they belonged to a church, and the church has an archive where they keep their old books and things. If it is there it can be left, and it can be taken away from there. They do not want to keep that if it's handed to them. I don't know if that would be the proper place, but the thing is this, when they give it to children and grandchildren, they move practically all over the world, and where will it at last be, the piece, the article? Will it be in Australia or somewhere else in Africa? It's perhaps safer when it is in an institution here,
Yeah.
so that you can go back and refer to it when you want to.
Yeah.
That's only my suggestions. I have no say about that. It's yours.
No, but that's a good suggestion. We have thought of the same thing, that there is a historical society that in fact also would keep archives.
Yes, yes. The Historical Society in Winnipeg, they keep anything that they can get
That
hold
might be better in a historical society than in a museum that may be more interested in physical artifacts. But we can investigate that.
Yeah, you can do what you like. I'm just telling you it's there.
Yeah. Could you, what kind of business did C.B. Loewen undertake? What was he, a farmer, a businessman?
I remember very little about that, but I think I sold some implements.
Ah,
At the beginning, I don't know just, I have forgotten that, I don't know, but he had, oh yes, but he had to do with the sawmill too. He worked on that too.
with C.T.? Did with C.T. then, with his sons?
No, that was before his son would take there.
I see.
I think, I do not remember very well, but I think it was some lumber that he sold too at that time.
The best I am able to get is that C.B. Loewen was de had veel drej. He had lots of going, but he never made much money. It wasn't that he ever had very much, but he'd farming and threshing and lumber, whatever.
Yes.
But I understand that, where did he live then at the time that you courted your wife, and where was she at home? Which farm were they at that time?
That was that was south of Steinbach on Highway number 12. The next buildings, well, there's only a barn left now, but that was south on Highway 12. And the first farm beyond Steinbach, that's where I remember, yeah, on the east side.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where I remember the Loewens to live. And then they moved to the north side on 1915, I think. No, I'm not sure of that year. But then they moved to the north side, and then they moved again to where the building stood last when he passed away.
Where?
That was half a mile east of Husky's filling station. Half a mile east on that.
Jacob F. Boitmans?
Yes, there, that's the place. There, Glenn, you have now.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Yeah. And he died there?
No, he died in Kansas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, on a visit.
No, he didn't have money. He went down south to earn money in the harvest.
Yeah, yes, but he just went for harvest. And then he came, but he lived in Manitoba. He wasn't moving. And the house that he lived in when he moved, or let's say when he went to Kansas, was still that house?
I thought they had only stayed on that farm till about 10, 11 years. I thought they had already moved off of that land before.
He died?
Yes, they lived in town later on, after they left that place on the farm. They lived
Did they not also move a little short while into Morris?
Yes, they were in Morris, I guess it was in 1926. and they lived in Morris, and he had a store there for a short time.
Yeah, and he died in 1928.
And they lived in C.T. Levin's buildings somewhere
In Steinbach.
in Steinbach, yeah.
So on that, what we in the meantime called Jakob F. Boitman Farm, that say they lived there from maybe 1915 to 20?
No, 25.
To 25.
About 25.
10 years.
Yeah, about 10, 11 years apparently they lived out there.
I see.
Because I still remember that I was a very little boy and that my parents took me along. I was maybe 5 or 6, and we visited them over in Morris, close to a creek. How did they come? How did our grandfather and your father-in-law, what church affiliations did he have? Did he start off to be a Kleingemeinde and then went?
Yeah.
How did that work?
Yes, he belonged to the Kleingemeinde, and then he married Mrs. Reimer, and then after a while he invited traveling ministers, and he got hold of the minister of the Church of God, and that's where he joined. He joined them, and his wife didn't at the beginning, but later she did, and they both belonged to the Church of God when he passed away.
But there was no Church of God in Steinbach.
No, there was none here.
That was in Morton, wasn't it?
Yeah, in Morris.
Morton, okay.
Yeah.
Morris.
I am not so sure the relation was distant.
Yeah.
There was no close by church for them.
Does that mean that on Sunday morning he did not go to the Kleingemeinde?
After that, no, he had, well, I don't know if a dispute, but a disagreement with them, so he left the church and didn't come back anymore.
And how about the sons? Chenals and Paita, and they were Kleingemeinde because they were born already.
Chenals joined the Kleingemeinde church, and the girls did. Mrs. Gerhard Giesbrecht, they did too, and Jacob Giesbrecht, they did too. So the 3 oldest children, they joined the Kleingemeinde church.
And well, the Chenals and Alm and Tien ook, Tien ook,
Yeah.
and Lies,
Yeah.
George Giesbrecht,
Yeah.
Jake Giesbrecht,
Lies and Alm and Tien.
and Tien and Chenals.
Ja, aber nicht Isaac und Peter und Ben nicht.
Nee. Wäre die amtlich, wäre das gute Jungs, wäre ein bisschen haastlich.
I remember very little about that.
You're a diplomat.
The word that we have is that they weren't, see, my father was only about, see, Mrs. C.B. Loewen, the first one died, what, in what was that, 02?
1902, I think.
When did
But we're not in the takes on, yo.
Yeah, when did she pass away?
She on 1902.
1902.
I think she passed away on 1902. I learned a song in school that I remember when he lost his wife. So my mother and Mr. Loewen were stepchildren, they were stepbrother and sister.
Yes.
So they were quite close, related, yeah. And that's why I know about that death, her death.
Oh, yeah.
So then, my father was only about 7 years old then. He was born in 1895. So who ran the household then for that little short time?
Because he married your mother-in-law in '03 or '04?
03, I think it was.
I see, so there was just about a year in between.
Yeah, a year between.
I understand that some of my dad and some of the uncles, the older, some of them were not very nice to the second C.B. Loewen.
We can understand when the stepchildren come in. We can understand that. In any case, that's
Yes,
general.
yes,
When they marry and they bring two families together, there's a disagreement. The children are minor. They cannot look into the case as well, and they may have some objections to that, and they show it in a more frankly than older people would show that.
Yes.
And I guess that was the case. That's what
When did you relieve Marie from that household? When did you marry?
1919.
So the same year that my parents got married?
Yeah.
Same year?
Yeah.
I see, okay.
Although the boys, like my father, would not have been at home on the farm anymore, no? Or did they eat schafer or schaftetus?
Yes, he worked home for quite a while. And he had Mr. Loewen, like you said, he was a variety man. He had bought an oil plow, and that was a new tractor in the vicinity.
Uh-huh.
And Jake drove that tractor.
Uh-huh.
And that made him a special man, because we could hear that bump of that
Boom,
oil plow.
boom, 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 boom.
We could hear that for a mile distance.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I think he worked at home until C.T. Loewen began to move, and then they joined him. I am not so familiar with that.
How would you, when you look at the village, the town, the community, you pretty well, with your memory and with your what you heard from your parents, you span a century. Are we generally, as a people, accommodating to a larger society in Canada and North America? Are we adapting well? Are we adapting too quickly? Are we losing things we should keep, or should we lose them?
The EMB Church had a general meeting this year in Steinbach for the South and Canada too. And they decided that they didn't want the name Mennonite anymore in their church. And and that has its reasons. We have talked about that in our church too. We have talked about that. That has its reasons why it sometimes bothers. But when we think of it, that we are an ethnic group, we can't avoid that. We can't bypass that. We are an ethnic group. And what would you call that? What are you? Are you Ukrainians? Are you French? What's your nationality? Are you Jews? Well, we are an ethnic group, and we have moved from one country to the other and kept our nationality, or ethnic group yet, if not the nationality. So that that ethnic group name, that will stay there. They call them Mennonites whether they believe anything or nothing.
That's true.
They don't care about that. They say they are Mennonites, regardless what language you speak or what church you belong to, or if you don't do anything. but the ethnic group remains the ethnic group. No. Oh, we have our failures too, but I think in general, when the big companies look for factory places in the country, they look for people that they kind of people that they think will work. They will do their duties. They have learned to obey and work to make their own living. And I think they sometimes pick, like Winkler now recently, they got a factory in there because the people thought, well, there the labor would be good there. And they built their mill factory there. So I think in that respect we hold our own. And because most of them have a strong religious background, they are honest too, and that makes a big difference too. So in that respect, I guess we do not fare too well, even if the Mennonites are looked down upon, and they look now that they have gone to South America and come back again, and then when they look at their doings there, they are looked down upon in that respect. But and then in Mexico too, their religion has, I guess that has fallen too. They had missed some of the parts. They were not that the people they used to be. You will have the story, heard the stories of some of the people that lived non-religious life.
Yeah. Well, do you want something more yet? I think that...
That's, I think, a very good review, and we thank you very much, Uncle John. You have certainly, in our lives, you have been a very precious uncle over the years, and more than that, you have been recognized, justly recognized in the community as someone who loved the heritage. You wanted to do something about it, and at a time when museums and historic societies really meant nothing to the people on the street, you persevered, and in the end we got a museum, we got a recognition of things that otherwise we certainly would not have grasped so quickly. And I think as a community leader, we thank you for what leadership you have taken, but also individually from us in our own family, we thank you for all your kindness over the years.
With the help of others. I have not done so much alone, with the help of others.
But you gave it a leadership.
I had an interest and I had an idea and I popularized it.
Yes, and you did it well.
I still remember, Uncle John, on the 75th anniversary, you invited me to speak at that anniversary.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you recall that. I was supposed to sort of represent the younger generation at that time.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
It was a real honor to be asked to do that.
Yeah. I have been with the Agricultural Society too. You can shut up.